Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are jumping into maybe the biggest topic of the N4 pre-intermediate level, which is passive. And passive voice drives a lot of people crazy, not just because of the formation or the sentence ordering, but just when you actually use it. And I'm hoping that through today's lesson, you might not end up with it, end up feeling, wow, this is all easy. I can do it perfectly. That's probably an unreasonable expectation. But we hope to take your comprehension and move it forward, and take your apprehension about passive voice and drop it down just a few levels. Might not get down to zero, but we're going to simplify it. Make it a bit less scary. And with that in mind, let's talk about it. Now, a lot of people might not know what passive voice is in English, in their own native language. And so it's worth discussing that first. Passive is, in English, it is typically when the focus of the sentence is on whatever received the action. Whatever the action was, whatever it was doing something to. Or if for whatever reason you don't want to, or it's not important to mention the doer or the actor, whoever is doing the action. And, we were talking about 7-Eleven earlier, and I don't remember the actual year. And so I'm just going to make a year up and say 7-Eleven was introduced in Japan in 1980. Maybe? I don't recall. And this is passive voice because 7-Eleven wasn't doing the introducing. It wasn't saying, hey, I'm 7-Eleven, nice to meet you. Someone else, a company, came in and introduced 7-Eleven to Japan. But do I care about who specifically did it? At least from my perspective, no. 1973, was not too far off. Thank you. So here, the action is usually to make it simple, or let's see who it is. Ito-Yokado, which was a company. Ito-Yokado introduced 7-Eleven in 1973. But I want to focus on 7-Eleven, not who introduced it, and so I use the passive voice. And that's, we have it. This building was erected in 1750. The car was destroyed by the tornado. It's focusing on the recipient of the action. And this is a sentence we're going to use later on when we talk about the Japanese. So we could say the mouse ate the cheese, focus on the actor, the mouse. Or we can flip it around and say the cheese was eaten. We may or may not mention, who ate the cheese. And that's your passive voice. Now, Japanese, strangely, actually takes passive and expands on it. It has a single construction, so all these usages will follow the same construction, but we use it for different reasons. And the second reason, which we'll talk about today, is a particularly useful one, which is why I feel that you hear passive much more often in everyday speech than you would hear passive in, say, English, because of that second one. It can be used in the same way that English uses it, which is to focus on the recipient or to not mention the actor, the doer. It can be used to mention something negative. Now, this is big, and we'll focus on this. Or it can be used to show respect for someone. And when I say respect, I mean that we haven't really gotten into this yet. We will soon. But Japanese has, your standard polite forms. It has your casual forms. It has a form kind of down to the side of that called the humble form. And then there's the honorific form up at the top. And that one, of the different ways you can use it, you can actually use the passive voice to show that someone is being raised up relative to the speaker. Now, that last one, we're not going to talk about today. We don't want to overload ourselves. But we will be hitting on the first two. And the usage is the same for the first two, which makes them, fairly easy to compare to one another. Now, we first need to talk about how to make them. Passive voice is one of those things where you hear it, and then when you try and say it, your tongue kind of gets tied up and then literally leaps out of your mouth because it doesn't want to be part of this. It's all those, it's that rareru, tabe rareru, tabe blah, 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 blah. It's hard to get those out initially. And so if you're having trouble saying them, you're not alone. There's a support group. We meet every Thursday. And it is tricky getting these sounds out because all of a sudden our verbs get so much longer. Taberu is now 5 characters instead of 3. Everything is getting a 2-character bump. And then the conjugation on top of that. So we are going to talk about, this is boring, but we're going to talk about the construction before we talk about the usage. So let's jump into that. Passive and potential are the same, but they're not. They are, but they aren't. They can be, but in common Japanese, you don't hear the overlapping usage I know that you're referring to, which is so great for us. But we will mention that when we get to the potential forms. Anyway, so let's take a look at the rules. As you can see, they all end in that reru, which is fun to say. You would never say that on its own, but reru. It ends with that, but how you get to that point, that character that comes before that changes, depending on what's going on. Now, you might notice something that will help you out here. And it's going to mention it in just a second, but let me see if I can hint you in the right direction. Let's take a look at that first verb, taberu. Can anyone tell me how you give the casual negative form of taberu, as in I don't eat, but say it casually? Tabenai. Thank you. Great. What about yomu? Let's just go down the list. What's I don't read? Not I can't read, but I don't read. Yoma. It's not the me. Me would be your potential form, as in I can't read. But yoma, yomanai. Right. What about kao? Let's just do one more. Kao as in to buy, but I don't buy. Kawanai. Thank you. Now, I'm going to... It looks like everyone's done typing, so I'm going to type those out real fast, all next to each other, and you'll see why. Notice how these look really similar to the passive form. Except, instead of that nai ending, we're putting the reru. Instead of that nai ending, we're putting the reru. Plus with ichidan, you're adding a little bit more. So with ichidan, our first verb, we drop the ru, and we add rareru. And you might be tempted to give it a little bit of a sing-songy voice, but I wouldn't recommend that. Taberareru. So we don't actually have speaking practice during these events, but your mics are off. So if you'd like, please try saying that, and try to get it at a semi-normal speed. Taberareru. Taberareru. It's not the easiest. It is not the easiest. So if you're tripping over it, don't worry. The second and third one, yomu and kao, and this is actually with all the Godan verbs. Whoops, there we go. With all the Godan verbs, you're conjugating it just like those negative verbs, and then you're adding the reru. So we had yomanai, yomareru. Kawanai, kawareru. So that u sound, that we usually have, yomu, kau, is changing to the a sound, the a step. The only tricky one, and this is why it's on the page, is the u. So if you have the kau, there we go. If you have kao, you do not change it to this. That would be kareru. Like you started to say it and then you saw a gigantic bird flying in front of you. And you just kind of got stuck on that syllable. It's not kareru, it's kawareru. So just like the negative form, we say kawanai, and here we say kawareru. So again, yomu would be yomareru. Kao would not be ka, but kawareru. And we have our two irregular verbs, like usual. They are having fun, doing their own thing. Suru is sareru. Suru is sareru. And kuru, for unknown reasons, changes to korareru. So this is a lot. And I'd actually like to spend a few minutes just practicing this and try and get this a bit more in our heads. I'm going to give you the dictionary form, the basic form of the verb. Please give me, again, the dictionary form. You don't need to conjugate it into mas or masen or whatever. Just give me the dictionary form of the passive voice. Okay? Matsu. Matsu. Now I'm using the kanji, but you can use just the hiragana. You are 51715, you're so close. You don't add just ru, you're adding reru on the end there. So it's not mataru, it's matareru. Yes. Yes. Good. Don't forget they all have to have reru. Even the special ones, suru and kuru, get changed to, they all got reru. That's the real strong identifier for your passive voice. Okay. What about osu? I was pushed yesterday. There's your passive voice. I was pushed. Osareru. And you might notice I'm focusing on things that can happen in a negative light. What if someone said something bad about you? It's like, it was said, they said, it was said that blah, blah, blah. It sounds strange in English, but it works really well in Japanese. You'll see. Iwareru. Sure. How about, don't look at the screen, just think. Suru, special verb. Sareru. Thank you. How about hanasu? Hanasareru. Good. And 51715, I like how they're using that step to step them over there. Eventually, in your head, that step will drop out, but until then, that's a really good way to do that. And how about kiru, as in to put on clothes, not the cut one. Good. Okay, we're going to see some more examples as we, actually get into the sentences. Now, the good news is once we've made this change, once we've switched over to passive voice, it's treated as an ichidan verb. Ichidan, again, being the same as taberu. So I'm going to grab that one right in the middle. Oh, if I can write it. Nope, I guess I can't. Yomareru. There we go. So if it's yomareru, yomaremasu, yomareta. Just like tabemasu, tabeta. Yomarenai, tabenai. So it's treated as, regardless of what it was before, once you shift over to the passive, you're treating it as an ichidan verb all the way through, which in a sense is nice. Once you've made the change, you no longer have to think about all the different verb types. Is it godan? Is it ichidan? Is it special? They're all ichidan. They're all ichidan in the end. So let's see how we actually make these sentences into passive voice. Now this actually should have a line break, so you have the two sentences next to each other. Oh, I apologize for that. But let's take a look at these two sentences. We're back to, talking about cheese. And, with these passive sentences, passive doesn't mean polite or casual or whatever. So you can use any other type of voice, anything polite, casual, present, past. There's no restrictions. It doesn't get harder past this point. But let's take a look at the changes. Now, I'm going to type out these two sentences real fast in English. The mouse ate the cheese, and the cheese was eaten by the mouse. Okay. Just like in English, in Japanese, that thing that you're focusing on, that's what's coming first. That's what's coming first. So in the first sentence, and there we go. The first sentence, the main thing is the mouse. The mouse ate the cheese. Nezumi wa cheese o tabemasu. So Nezumi's coming first. But if you're focusing on the cheese, like the cheese is what's important to you, cheese is coming first. Chizu wa instead of nezumi wa. Here's the big change in structure. If you are mentioning the doer, the actor, the doer, the normal sentence, we're fine here. Nezumi wa cheese o tabemasu. However, if the important thing, the cheese is being brought to the front, what do you do with the actor? The actor gets marked with a ni. In a sense, it turns into an indirect object, kind of. So this is the big change. The actor, if you have it, gets marked up with a ni. Additionally, I just mentioned this, but, in the first sentence, the cheese is what's being acted on. The cheese is being eaten. But the second sentence, the cheese is, it's the main thing. So that O disappears, and you're bringing cheese up to the front. Okay, let me back. So this is our core structure for passive sentences, all passive sentences. If this ordering can get into your head and stay there, then you've got passive sentences down. The construction of the verb, it's just a matter of remembering those changes. There's no ordering. It's just, can I get that switched over to that reru form? And then you're making that switch over. So I'm going to type out a few things to hopefully help you remember this. The important thing comes first. I mentioned that before, but in passive, it's the recipient that's important. You're focusing on the cheese. Maybe you wanted that cheese. Like, cheese is delicious if you like cheese. I love cheese. And so if a mouse focused on the cheese, now I'd be angry at the mouse. But I am more devastated that cheese is not going into my mouth. And so cheese is important. Cheese is coming first. The important thing comes first. And the actor, and we called it the doer earlier. The actor, I'm not referring to the gendered actor, actress, just, the thing doing the acting. The doer is marked with ni if included. And so let me give you a quick example about that if included thing. Here it is. This is what's on the screen, in Renshu right now on our screen share. This is fine. this is also fine. If you feel like it's not necessary to mention the actor, or if you don't know who did it. Maybe there's a big block of cheese. Now, ultimately, that's your fault. If you leave cheese on the table and someone else eats it, that was going to happen. Don't leave cheese unattended. Just dig into it, eat that cheese. But if you are, if you're rolling the dice and you come back and that cheese is gone, but you don't know who did it, and it's a cheese murder mystery, and there's the mouse. There's also your spouse or your children or whoever. You're like, who ate this cheese? Then you might just drop it and just say, cheese wa taberareta. The cheese was eaten. Who did it? And yes, it was probably Shoyu. We all know that. I don't know how Shoyu found my house and got in here, but Shoyu probably did it. So, important thing comes first. Actors marked with the ni. But if you don't know the actor, or you don't care about the actor, or whatever, you just drop that thing out. So, let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit more about this structure and whatnot. With English and Japanese, you see things that are a bit different here. You can say in Japanese, hono kaita, which is fine. And that's called the active voice because it shows the actor. It shows the actor doing it. That's okay. Where's the pay? Here we go. With English, English and Japanese, the passive voice matches up much better. In Japanese, you can drop the subject. You don't have to mention it at all. With English and Japanese and the passive voice, it matches up a bit better. So hono kaita would be the book was written. It's a very clean translation. Hon wa kakareta. Oh, Megumi, you're killing me. You're missing out on, if I can find it, one of our better stickers. There we go. We have very few stickers in here, but a few of them have made their way over from the Renshu app in here. So let's get to some more practical examples, and this will help you out. So first, take a look at what's going on here. And hopefully you don't know this word. This is one of those words where it's better if you just go through life not knowing it, because that means it probably hasn't happened to you. But shikaru means to scold. It's not angry level. It's like a step before angry, but it's you're being scolded, by the teacher, by your parent or whatnot. And, if you were scolded by the teacher and it was you, you're speaking, you don't need to mention you. So you have a sentence as simple as sensei ni. So who did it? It was the teacher. Sensei ni shikararemashita ka? Sensei ni shikararemashita ka? Now that's a long verb. It's super long. But you'll get there. It'll sink into your head. Sensei ni shikararemashita ka? Now, let's practice a little bit. Let's practice some sentences. I'm going to give you, a couple objects. We're going to play basically the word garden game that we have on Renshu, which if you haven't played before is where Renshu gives you a couple of words, 2 or 3 words, and you try and make a sentence, any sentence, using those words. And the only extra rule we're going to have here is that the verb I give you must be in the passive voice. And so let me give you, we're going to start simple and be as silly as you want with the sentences and as short as you want. They don't have to be extensive and drawn out. It can be 3 words, just like this sentence in front of us, and that's fine. But if I give you the one word we always keep coming back to, taberu, to eat. And I say, go for it. Make a sentence using this. You could use the cheese example we had before. You could say, I don't know why Boldon jumped in here all of a sudden, but I just assumed that maybe they're here to eat. So I'm going to say, 케이크 wa Boldon ni taberareta. The cake was eaten by Boldon. So take taberu and try and come up with a sentence, long or short, complicated or simple, that talks about something that was eaten, something that is being eaten. You can use it, you can see it right in front of you right now. So if you happen to be in the room when the terrible murder of Fuifo-san was occurring, and you're like, I'm watching them right now. Fuifo is eating Fuifo. Oh my goodness. You can use the te iru form. That's fine. But give it a shot. Nibutsu might be locked in a zombie game. Although I'm kind of curious, Nibutsu, if just your arm was eaten, do you still have your hand? Or did they go just for that middle section? That bony elbow. They're like, I need some of that elbow. Still got the hand. Well, it's a silver lining. Okay, I like the sentences so far. And 51715 is jumping in with a question word and everything. I'm going to read that one because I like it. Everyone's is great, of course. But they went into the question. So they said, who ate the snack? You would say in English, who ate the snack? But in Japanese, you might say it and you'll see exactly why 51715 chose this. It's more like, who was the snack eaten by? It sounds clumsy in English, but it works great in Japanese. Okay, next word. This one, this gives you a bit more latitude, a bit more freedom. Tsukuru. To make. Talk about something. Things are made every day. What was made? What will be made? What is being made? Shoyu is indeed being made every day. I agree with that. Not sure if you can make a murder case, but I award you points for trying. But I will point out that use like that style that Fuipo used, you can use that and then bury yourself as the actor inside of the sentence. So if you made something, for example, there was a Lego little Lego thing that was made, and someone says, "Who made that?" And you want to be slightly formal, instead of just saying me, you could say it was made by me. you could say, Lego wa boku ni, or Lego wa watashi ni tsukurareta. The Lego was made by me. Sure. And that does happen. But thank you everyone for putting those sentences up. Now, I would, let me give you one more. This one is probably the widest range because you have every suru verb that you can think of. There's so many. It's not just suru just by itself, but it's suru plus any other word that can come before suru. Poor Pokemon. Shoyu's jumping in with the slightly harder than N4 level. But don't forget, you can use Kale-chan's little, I'll go ahead and do it. No, that's fine. You have Kale-chan break it apart. I'm going to focus on the verb that they used. Shite is kind of like to point out. All right, let's go ahead and keep going. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them. But we're about to jump into my favorite. This sounds like I like bad things to happen, but it's my favorite in that I like it because we don't have it in English. And it's a cool usage of the passive voice. And if you remember, it's the one we talked about before. The passive voice can be used to emphasize the speaker's not being so happy about something happening, about something negative happening from the perspective of the speaker. And this one you hear all the time. I'd say it's probably much more common than the other one. The other one you might hear when you hear more kind of like textbook descriptions of things, but in discussion, in conversation, you hear this one a lot because people are always complaining. You need a way to get that, to let that stress get out. It doesn't necessarily need to happen to someone. Someone doesn't have to be the recipient of the action. You just have to not like it, and it have a negative impact on you. So let's take a look at a few examples. Oh, and for those of you that I'm not going to lean into the stereotype and assume that you all love anime. But for those of you that do, there's probably a phrase. You've probably heard this before. Or the one that's a bit simpler, furareta. The first one I wrote is the more natural way of saying it, but it uses a grammar form that we haven't gotten to yet. But it refers to being rejected by someone. Like, I confessed my love to them, and they said, no, thank you. Furareta. As in, I was turned down. I was turned down by them. And so in that one, it is the passive voice because it is happening to you. You're being turned down by someone, and it's presumably pretty negative. So you're not so happy about it. So, again, these are slightly different in that they don't need to have an object. Something doesn't need to receive the action. But if you think it's negative, if you are put off by it, you use this. So let's take a look at these examples. The first one is pretty clear. The child or children, it's one of those strange words where kodomo, the domo makes you think it's more than one, but it can be just one. Kodomo wa hachi ni sasareta. The child was stung by a bee. And so maybe you're a teacher or you're the parent, and you see that and you're like, that's not good. They were stung by a bee. That's not great. And so you would use this, and the nuance here is that, okay, this is not a good thing. This is not a good thing that's happening. Now the second one is the interesting one, I think, because ame ni furaremashita. Now it could be that you were outside and it rained on you directly and now you're soaked. And so you did receive the action. It rained on you. However, that doesn't have to be the case. For me, right now, my kids love snow, but I'm not so crazy about it. So because I have to dig things up. Let me get the right kanji to appear. There we go. I could swap out this ame with yuki and say, oh, in English, I would just say it snowed. And you might give that little sound. But here, you're using the passive voice, and you're not saying it was snowed. The snowing has happened. Like it's not that. You're actually just saying it snowed. But by using the passive voice here, you're saying, this sucks. I don't want it to snow. It snowed. Oh, now I have to go, dig my car out. So no one's receiving the action necessarily, but it results in some kind of negative consequence or feeling, and therefore you use the passive to say, I don't like this. But be careful, like I said, be careful when translating it back to English or thinking about the English comparison. You wouldn't try and figure out it was snowed on. No, it's not that. It's just it snowed. And then maybe in parentheses, yuck, kind of thing. So it's used to mark that negativeness. With the last one, again, this may or may not affect you directly. So, tonari no hito ni tobacco o suwareteru. The person nearby, it might be the person literally next to you. It might be the person in the house next to you, and they're smoking. And they might be far enough away from you to where there's no way you're getting any secondhand smoke. So you're not directly receiving any negative aspects of the smoking, but you just don't like it. You're just thinking, ugh, they're smoking. Yeah, that's not good for them. It couldn't affect you at all, but you're like, that's not going to help them. They're going to die early, or they might get, something might bad happen to them. With Fuipo, I'll answer your question in just a sec. We're about at the end of this, and I can field questions. But with this usage, you can see there's a lot more flexibility. Again, in English, you would probably say, the person over there is smoking. And again, you might grumble your complaint. But without having any of those extra words, just by having the passive voice, you signal your disagreement or disgust or just your yada feelings about it just with the passive voice. Now, I'm just going to throw it out and mention it to you, but don't let this trip you up. We will talk about it at a later point. There is a third usage of passive, and it's the one that's used for honorific forms, and you can say something like this. I'm going to keep, this is super simple. If you usually said he ate, just for example, you would just say kare wa tabeta. Simple, basic. But if kare happens to be, for example, your boss or someone that you would like to raise up relative to where you are, kare wa taberareta. And this actually doesn't, now it's too simple, so there might be some ambiguity, but this wouldn't mean he was eaten. It means he ate. And also he's important. So I pushed him, I pushed him above me. And it might be something like this. Let me change it. Kare wa sushi o taberareta. Which is kind of weird to fit into your head because you're like, it's passive, but they're the actors coming first. And there's no ni in there. Wait, what's going on? But it's something we'll talk about later. So just in case you've seen this and you're thinking, wait, why? How does this fit into the whole thing? It's a slightly different use of passive voice or the passive formation in order to show, raise someone up relative to you in speaking. Okay. If you have any questions, please feel free, or say, how would I say this? Does this work? But with Flippo's question, it's typically the transitive. Because typically passive has a recipient, and that's what you're bringing to the front of the sentence. So if you were to say, I'm going to say, like, the car was stopped. You see it's not toma, it's tome. Because usually you would say, I stopped the car. I stopped the car. You're flipping those two. And that subject is, or not the subject, excuse me, the object is coming to the front of the sentence. It's becoming the important thing. So it gets that wa. Kuruma wa tomerareta. So I hesitate to say it's always the case because there might be a situation where you use the intransitive, but I'd say if there's a transitivity pair where there's the two forms, you're going to be using the transitive one. There might be a verb that is considered intransitive simply because there's not a pair that goes with it that you can use in passive, but I can't pull an example out of my head. Now, we do have a ton of passive examples inside of Renshu, not just the quizzing, but if you jump, I'll show you real fast. If you go to the grammar section and search for passive, now skip this one. This one's a monster. We'll get to this one in a few weeks. Causative passive is forms on top of forms. But this passive one down here, we actually break it up into 4 different. Kowagaru is not passive. It's actually an adjective with the garu suffix on it. But anyway, passive, or ukemi, as it's called in Japanese, we have a whole bunch. Wow, 16 examples. That's a ton. They're right down here. So many. And you're probably wondering, why is all this extra junk on here? This is stuff to help me with editing sentences if I need to. And that's just one of the sections. So we've got 5 down here, scrolling down 2 more. So there's a bunch. There's a bunch in here. So feel free to look up passive in the dictionary and check it out. But otherwise, let me say again, and I say this almost every lesson, but especially with passive, it is a tricky topic. And so the ordering and the spelling and the conjugation does take time for it to sink in. And so don't feel bad if you still feel like you're at almost 0%. You said, I started this lesson with 0% and now I'm at 5%. That 5 is significant. And being able to use passive fluently and quickly, it takes a large amount of practice to get there. But just take it bit by bit, and you'll start to see these come up, and it definitely will help you. But anyway, this lesson will be available in the Discord channel inside of Renshu, as well as in our YouTube channel. So feel free to check it out if you want to. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we see you next time. Bye.